We have Dr. Goldsmith, Osama Goldsmith. He's an American researcher and writer who has lived in Kenya for over 40 years. Dr. Goldsmith has one of the, he has one of the greatest grasps of the historical backgrounds of coastal and northern Kenya areas, and his work appears in various publications, including Kwani. So tell us about the story that you wrote for DQ1, Magogoni Before the Port.
The first phase of my exploration of Kenya started on the north coast of Kenya, where I did a thesis on the Bajuni agriculture and maritime complex. So my essay tells the story of Magogoni, the site of the Kenya's second port, as it was at that time, and the dynamics under it. So it's partially a story about the Swahili way of life at that time, but it's more a story about Uswahili. When Kenya gained independence in 1963, Amu was the only settlement that still conveyed the former glory and unique Swahili way of life. The archipelago's other towns, Pate, Sio, and Faza, had gone from independent city-states to, in the late 19th century, to isolated backwater outposts. The rise of Mombasa as the primary port for the new colony acted to draw away much of the population economic capital from these former sultanates, a process that continued during the decades following independence. The Bajuni mainland, however, remained relatively stable during the colonial era. The agricultural settlements remained productive. When decline set in, it was sudden, and the ramifications were to become much greater than anyone understood at the time. Upon achieving independence, repeated shift of bandit attacks impoverished the prosperous Bajuni settlements. Many of the IDPs returned to their homes, only to suffer more incursions. By 1965, all but a few of the Bajuni inhabiting the area between Magogoni and Ras Kiamboni had relocated to new villages elsewhere in the district and to Lamu town. When the hostilities formally ended in 1969, by that time the mainland Bajuni had been scattered across the coastal strip and beyond to Tanzania and other places. By the early 70s, however, life was beginning to return to some of the Bajuni mainland settlements. There were around 15 families reestablishing their homes in Rubu, maybe 20 in Mamborde. Magogoni was a proper village, mainly due to its location to the high-end tourist camp in Stesheni, a creatively constructed lodge situated in the archipelago's most paradisically beautiful niche. This was the site of the Al-Shabaab attack and kidnapping, I think 2016. Okay, but Magogoni was still emerging as the main catchment for Lamu's internally displaced Bajuni. The area of, I tell the story of going and visiting there for the first time, okay? The area of cashew cultivation we passed through during my first visit was in the early stages becoming mashamba. Now in Swahili, mashamba is actually an imported word from Le Champ in French. The indigenous Swahili Bajuni term is konde for a farm, but when it becomes permanent, it becomes shamba, okay? IDPs like Hassan hope to see their homesteads develop into proper farms over time. Magogoni was now representing a new kind of Swahili mui. Its establishment was proceeding through the settlement of Bajuni and returnees from the Swahili diaspora, their Boni and Orma neighbors, and supposed outsiders like our Kamba visitors over time. Like the peri-urban areas of Nairobi and Mombasa, the ethnically mixed Majengo neighborhoods defining the rise of Kenyan towns and other spaces of multi-ethnic interaction, it was possible to discern how such informal processes were contributing to the emergence of a more cosmopolitan, multicultural Kenya. Coevolution describes how distinct entities interact and mutually adapt to the world they jointly inhabit. Whereas the environment serves as the primary mechanism of selection in conventional evolution, in coevolution, the organization of the system also selects for adaptive traits and behaviors. This enables each agent to tune the structure of its own landscape while forming couplings to other landscapes to its own advantage. This process explains the emergence of urban society in the Sahel and on the Swahili coast. Both names derive from the same term, reflecting slight phonetic variations on the Arabic letter sin. The two regions, illustrate how coevolutionary forces molded the urban civilizations arising deep in the interior and the same process along the maritime interface. Much more could be said about this historical dynamic, including examples of how it sustained the process of cultural and technological exchange and syntheses from across the region. For present purposes, however, it will suffice to confirm this process continues to operate, albeit underneath the surface of formal governance in Kenya. Although I did not understand in these terms at the time, I was to witness the unfolding of this process in Magogoni over the following years. Naturally, it involved frictions as the number of settling in Magogoni expanded as the instant following our departure from Hassan's tiny house, homestead illustrated.
Osama, for you to have been able to write about Magogoni, and particularly about the Bajonis, their traditional homestays, the agricultural cycles, the social organization, their displacement, their struggles with banditry, their attempts to rebuild their lives through agriculture and fishing in Magogoni and other settlements. And I must say, you've done a great job of this, because you've balanced between portraying their hardships and resilience without romanticizing or oversimplifying their experiences. Now, to do this, to illustrate all of this, you must have had to integrate with the community. But you also maintained an outsider's perspective. So how do you balance these roles in your narrative, these dual perspectives?
The ethnographic method is based on participant observation. So many of my professors said, you passed that line a long time ago. So I became engaged. I worked as a Bajuni fisherman. I've worked as a farmer. I cut mangrove. I spent long nights out on the open ocean. I poled boats, till your arms are about to fall off and things like that. I was young, I'm very healthy, huh? In 1976, also during the first Ramadan I was there, I reverted to Islam. I'd been involved in a lot of spiritual discipline, meditation, yoga, and things like that. So the methodology of Islam fit very much into the direction I was going. So anyway, I became very much part of the society in Lamu, which at that time was quite intimate. Everybody knew each other. For me, it was a perfect laboratory to study Islam and other processes like the Uswahili you talk about. So anyway, near the point when I was getting not too far, I was going to leave, my friends of mine said, okay, you've done everything you've done here, you need to get married. Now this was like a foreign concept to me. I had at that point, I had never had even a permanent girlfriend for a long time. And so the idea was set in my head and it grew, and then the friend who's one of the main characters in this story, when you read it, also became like my uncle or father's substitute and started introducing to me people. And so all of a sudden on June 13th, 1976, I was there in the mosque and saying Kabetu, and a whole nother chapter began. So,
He's not finished.
I haven't answered your question yet as such. But one of the fantastic things about Kenya, I think we didn't divert the world into two types of society, open societies and closed society. Kenya is a very open society. Amu, the coast of Kenya, is probably among the most open. So historically, there's people coming from different places, parts of the world, mainly on boats and things, that got off and ended up and going through the same process I did. So once I'm rooted within the society, I have commitments. I'm like a citizen, raia wa Uswahili. I go on and pursue the dynamics of how it operates. So since that time, it's my quest is begin to try to understand and describe and analyze how Kenya operates as a complex system. And I don't know if that answers the question.
It does, and it brings me to my next question. Here you are, 1974, an American in the coast, How did the community of Magogoni and the Bajuni family, Hassan's family, who's in your story, react How did they react to your interest and involvement in their lives? Were there any moments of resistance or skepticism towards your research, and how did you address them?
Actually, I don't think I ever experienced any real barriers. I mean, main problem is because of my complexion, I got a lot of sunburn. But in terms of socially, I don't think there was any second guessing. I have experience, like you're saying, more in northern Kenya, where whether the motives or the incentives, of course, anywhere you go in Kenya, you're going to be accused of being a CIA agent, right? So you get used to that very early in the game. And say, well, if I was really that, I mean, look at the clothes I'm wearing. So, I mean, I really don't get paid enough.
Thank you so much.